Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. Have you ever been on a plane, felt that push back into your seat as the nose points to the sky, and thought, what's actually going on in the cockpit right now? Well, today we're going to demystify two of the most basic yet critical maneuvers in aviation, climbing and descending. So buckle up, we're clear for takeoff. Here's our flight plan. First, we'll touch on the fundamental forces that make flight possible. Then, we'll dive deep into mastering the art of the climb. After that, we'll ask the question, just how high can a plane actually go? From there, it's all about the controlled descent, and we'll wrap it all up by talking about how pilots absolutely nail that final approach for landing. And you can bet we're using the official playbook for this. Everything we're talking about today comes straight from the source, the FAA's Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge. This is, for real, the Bible for anyone learning how to fly. Okay, so at its very core, flying is this constant tug of war between four forces. You've got lift, pulling up, weight, pulling down, thrust pushing forward, and drag pulling back. When a plane's just cruising along, they're all in a perfect, stable balance. But to climb or descend, a pilot has to intentionally and skillfully tip those scales. All right, let's get our virtual flight underway. First up, the climb. Now, it sounds simple, right? Just pull back on the yoke and point the nose up? Not quite. A proper climb is a really precise maneuver. It's not just about the angle. You need an excess of thrust from the engines to overcome all the extra drag you're creating. The whole thing is a coordinated dance. The pilot smoothly brings the nose up to the right pitch, but at the exact same time, they're increasing engine power. Then they use something called trim, which fine-tunes the control surfaces so the plane holds that attitude by itself. It's kind of like setting cruise control, but for climbing. From there, the power stays put, and the pilot just makes tiny adjustments to the plane's pitch to control the airspeed. And this is what the pilot actually sees. On the left, you've got your classic steam gauges with the artificial horizon showing that nose-up attitude. On the right, a modern glass cockpit shows all the same critical info, just digitally. It's different technology for sure, but the fundamental information is exactly the same. Now, you should know, not all climbs are created equal. Pilots use very specific airspeeds depending on what they need to do. The first one is called VX, or best angle of climb. Just think of this as the, oh man, I've got to get over those tall trees at the end of the runway speed. It gives you the steepest climb possible. You gain the most altitude while covering the least amount of ground. And the other key speed is VY, or best rate of climb. This is your let's get up to our cruising altitude as fast as possible speed. You'll cover more ground than you would in a VX climb, but you're gaining altitude in the shortest amount of time. It's all about vertical efficiency. And this picture just makes it crystal clear, right? That super steep yellow path, that's VX. You're clearing that immediate obstacle, like those trees. The longer, more gradual red path is VY. It gets you higher, faster, but you're covering more ground to get it done. It's one of the first decisions a pilot makes right after taking off. You know, reaching your target altitude isn't about just slamming on the brakes at the last second. Pilots have this handy 10% rule. So if you're climbing at 500 feet per minute, you actually start leveling off 50 feet before your target. This gives the airplane a moment to smoothly lower its nose, build up speed, and then you can reduce power, all without overshooting your altitude. It's all about being smooth and staying ahead of the airplane. Okay, so we've successfully leveled off. But this brings up a pretty interesting question. Can a plane just keep climbing forever? I mean, what are the actual physical limits here? So let's really think about that. If you just keep the power cranked up and the nose pointed at the sky, can an airplane just climb right on into space? The answer is a hard no, and this chart shows us exactly why. See, as a plane climbs, the air gets thinner and thinner. That does two things. The engine starts producing less power, and the wings generate less lift. So look at this chart. The airspeeds for your best angle, VX, and your best rate, VY, they get closer and closer together the higher you go. Eventually, they meet at a single point. And that point, that's the absolute ceiling. It's the altitude where there just isn't enough power or air to go even 1 foot higher. So we've hit our peak. Time for part 2 of our flight, the descent. And you guessed it, just like climbing, it's not about just pointing the nose at the ground and hoping for the best. It's a precisely controlled maneuver. The physics here are basically the mirror image of a climb. The pilot reduces the power and lowers the nose. And now the force of weight, which was your enemy on the way up, actually becomes your ally. It helps pull the aircraft forward along its flight path, which is why you don't need as much engine power to keep your speed up. And here we are, back in the cockpit. You can see the attitude indicator now shows a clear nose-down pitch. The altimeter would be spinning backwards, and the vertical speed indicator would be showing a negative number, confirming that rate of descent. Now, pilots have a few different types of descents in their toolkit. The partial power descent is your standard, everyday way you come down from cruising altitude. A glide is what you do with the engine at idle or off. Think of it like coasting your car down a hill. And then there's the emergency descent, which is a very rapid maneuver you'd use to get down fast if you had a problem like a cabin depressurization. No matter how you get down, all descents eventually lead to the single most critical phase of any flight, the final approach to land. This is where all of that training and precision really comes together. Coming down from 35,000 feet isn't just one long slide. It's more like a carefully planned staircase. Pilots descend to a certain altitude, level off for a bit to slow down and get the plane configured, put the landing gear down, set the flaps, and then they start the next step down. The whole process is designed to have you arrive over the airport perfectly set up and ready to land. The secret to a safe landing is something called a stabilized approach. Think of this table as the final recipe for success. By the time the plane is about 1,000 feet off the ground, it has to be at the right airspeed, fully configured, descending at a steady rate, and lined up perfectly with the runway. If even one of those things is off, the safest thing to do is abort the landing, go around, and set up to try it again. The whole goal is to lock onto a constant glide path. It's like an imaginary wire stretching from the airplane right down to the touchdown spot on the runway. The pilot makes constant, tiny adjustments to the pitch and power to stay right on that line, all while fighting any wind that's trying to push them off course. Then, just a few feet above the runway, the final move happens. It's called the roundout or the flare. The pilot gently pulls back on the controls to raise the nose. This creates one last little bit of lift, which slows the plane's descent rate down to almost zero and bleeds off that last bit of airspeed, all for a nice, gentle touchdown. And the FAA handbook really says it best. The whole point of all this work isn't to fly the plane into the runway. It's to fly the plane to a point just above the runway, and then simply allow it to settle. It's the perfect finish to a well-flown descent. So, we've covered the ups and downs of flying, this constant dance of power and pitch, but it leaves you with a final thought, right? Now that we get the vertical part, what other forces are pilots managing to steer the plane left and right? Well, that's a story for another time. Thanks for joining us on The Explainer.